The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. This is Bob Jakowski with On Demand Advisors. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar. Today, our topic is going to be how to eliminate friction with your buyer to accelerate revenue growth. Well, I'd like to share with you some thoughts about this because as you've looked at over time, looked at your company, looked at the markets you serve, look at the decision makers that are part of your ecosystem, you start thinking about what's changed. And a lot has changed for the buyer that you have today. And we want to talk about some of those topics because as the buyers change, you need to think about how to align your company with the buyer's change with their new mentality. And I'd like to talk about some of the expectations that buyers have. So for your B2B buyer today, for your solution, for your service, what we find in many cases is that the buyers they have high expectations. They expect a lot from you. They expect thought leadership. They expect innovation. They expect new ways to solve old problems. And they really expect responsiveness. The other thing with today's buyer is living in an opt-in culture. So you want buyers, the right buyers, to opt in to your company. You want them to select you as opposed to you just selecting them. So it's really looking at how buyers are thinking about how to negotiate and how to work with companies in terms of what they want to get in terms of critical support for their companies. Another thing that is happening today is we live in a world of instant gratification where buyers are looking at, I want to understand your solution. I want to get educated. I want to go through a immersive process with you. I really want to understand the benefits. I want to understand how you're going to solve my problems. I would like to see some proof about how you're going to do that. And I'd like you to show me some customers just like me in the same industry or the same challenges, how you've solved them to take away the risk. And can you do all that in the next 30 minutes? So instantaneous gratification. So the expectations that your buyer has today are really very high. Another thing that's important for both your buyer as well as for your company is velocity. Now, we work with a lot of companies. In fact, we've been operators of some premier subscription SaaS companies and executing those companies and growing those companies. But what you find as you look at the economy today, you look at subscription-based, you look at how companies are looking at parsing their solutions and progressive profiling as far as companies growing into the service. What you're finding today is velocity is important because you need to figure out how you're going to collapse the sales process quickly. You also need to figure out how you're going to accelerate the buyer and the buyer's journey quickly. So there's no reason it has to take 6 months or 9 months for the enterprise. Why can't it take 5 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week? So you start thinking differently about how to do that with today's revelation. As you can see in our image here today, we've got the road, and this is your buyer's journey. And the challenge with the road, as you can see, is there are a lot of speed bumps. The challenge that we all have, that you have, is how to eliminate the speed bumps, how to make this as a frictionless process between you and your buyer so that there's a velocity for both of you. And that's what we're going to discuss today. But before we do that, let's start off with a couple polls because we'd love to understand you as our audience today, understand what's important to you. And we want to talk today about where you think you're at today in some of these areas, like buyer engagement or prospect engagement. And we want to find out some of the goals that you'd like to get out of today's webinar. So we'd love to make this interactive. And by the way, as we go through today's webinar, post your questions. We want to answer your questions today in the Q&A session. We also want to make sure if we have too many questions that we're able to come back and respond to any specific question that you have today. So let's start off with a couple of polls and ask everybody on today's webinar if you'd be so kind to participate. We'd love to share with you and get the information. So when you think about engagement that you have today with your buyer or with your prospect, what do you think is your primary goal? And we want to pick basically one this time, which is really understand their requirements, their needs better. Is it to shorten your sales cycle? Is it to reduce your cost of sales? Is it to help accelerate the buying process? Or is it to enable them to buy without dependency on sales, on your sales team? So go ahead if you could. I'll leave the poll open for a few minutes here, not a few minutes, but a few moments. And let's go ahead and get your input, and I'll share that with everybody on our webinar today. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Let me go ahead and opt in, if you will. And let me go ahead and share the results. Okay. 20% of you stated that your main goal is to understand their requirements better. So understanding your buyer, understanding their requirements, what they're looking for. 27% stated it's to shorten your sales cycle. 40%, the number one area, is to accelerate their buying process. So really accelerate, enable their buying process. And then 13% stated that it's to really enable them to buy without dependency on the sales team. That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Let's do one more poll if we could, and appreciate your thoughts on that one. So when you think about benefits, what benefits, and this would be a select all that apply, what benefits would you like to receive if you can implement a frictionless buying process? And let me go ahead and share with you the options here. One benefit would be to increase profitability. So if you can eliminate friction, obviously that means you can get things done quicker, more expeditiously, and increase profitability. The second would be to offer the same online and offline buying experience. So one of the things that we find often is that a sales executive may have a great meeting with a prospect or with a decision maker, but that doesn't necessarily translate to the rest of the enterprise that's involved in terms of selecting your solution. Or other folks may not be at the same level of understanding of what you can do today to assist them strategically. The third area is to shorten the sales cycle. Fourth is to make your sales team more productive. And then the fifth is to gain better ROI from your marketing investments. So go ahead and opt in and just let us know what you think is most important to you. And again, this is a multi-choice, so we'll share the results of everybody on our webinar today. Perfect. Let me go ahead and close this off and share the results. Okay, 8% stated that primary goal would be to increase profitability if you have a frictionless buying process. Another 8% stated you'd like to have the same online and offline buying experience. The number one area is to shorten your sales cycle. That's 46%. And then we've got number two, which is make your sales team more productive. And finally, 15% are stating getting better ROI from your marketing investments. So good feedback. Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate that very much. A little bit about our company, and I'll make this very short. We are a little bit different than probably any company you've ever worked with before because we're all about revenue acceleration. That's what we do. We're all about working with business owners and executives that state, well, I need to, instead of growing at 10% a year, I need to grow at 35% year over year. How do I do that? So we're all about strategic advice anchored in revenue acceleration best practices. We also offer a revenue acceleration system. And we call it a system because revenue creation is an end-to-end process that you want to optimize. And no matter what you do in your career, wherever you go, you're going to want to have that skill set. You're going to want to be great at it. You're going to want to figure out how to optimize around that. And you're going to want to be able to bring that type of true validation and true reality to every company that you work at and work with. When we work with companies too, we want to act as a catalyst for change and for evolution and to help the executives achieve those type of goals. And as you found, if you've worked with us in the past and you came to these webinars, we love innovation. Innovation is in our blood about revenue acceleration and thinking differently, thinking out of the box. And then finally, any plan that you have today is only as good as execution and achievement. So it's about putting the plan in place. And we've worked with hundreds of different B2B companies. Some of them are startups, some are mid-stage, some are large companies. But we all find that it's a very rich tapestry, rich experience that we bring to the table. Now, if you've come to webinars like ours in the past, you're finding that, let me see if I'm showing this. Sorry about that. Okay, let's see if I'm sharing this. If you come to these webinars in the past, I think you'll find that you've seen this, or you've seen some iteration of this. And this is the revenue acceleration system. So the revenue acceleration system is looking at your company, and you could take this to any company and say, this is best practices for revenue acceleration. And we help companies put this in. And when you think about the purple is all about strategy. The red is about marketing, the yellow is about sales, and the green is about partnering, your ecosystem, your strategic alliances, and so forth. But what we've done as we were building a company called Intact as a software as a service company, we started creating this system and implementing this system as operators. I was the CEO, Craig was the CMO, and we basically put the system in place. Now we've evolved the system over many years with many customers and helped figure out how to optimize these best practices for them. So I wanted to share that with you, and hope that that's helpful in terms of setting the stage about who we are and perhaps what we bring to the table. What Craig's going to do now is he's going to spend some time, and we talked about this, Craig and I both CEO and CMO at a number of outstanding companies. Together, we bring a lot of strategic value to our customers. Craig came up from a marketing perspective. He's done a tremendous amount of branding and a tremendous amount of work in terms of marketing best practices. I came up a long time ago through sales and strategy and business development. So together we bring a holistic view in terms of thinking about your business and how to go forward. So what we want to do now is we want to talk about, and Craig is going to walk you through this, 6 ways today that companies are increasing friction with their buyer. They may not realize it, you may not realize it, but we wanted to walk you through that because sometimes we unknowingly slow down our sales process. Sometimes we put obstacles or speed bumps in front of our prospects and customers. And let's go through a couple of examples. And Craig, thank you so much for walking everybody through that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Bob. And thank you, everybody, for attending today. So as Bob mentioned, and he showed you our revenue acceleration system, it's not a static system. Since Bob and I, as operational executives and running this company today, we have and continue to talk to so many different software companies. And so we continually tweak our system to improve it and to add best practices. So it's as we encounter our own speed bumps, we figure out ways to help our clients overcome them, and then we incorporate them into our system. And so as Bob and I have worked with now hundreds, literally hundreds of software companies, we think we've identified at this point the most salient points for which you need to overcome. And we're going to share those today with you. And please stay with us till the very end because we'll be talking about next steps. So as Bob shows this metaphor here, you know, we all want to speed to the end of the road with the end of that rainbow with a big pot of gold. But unfortunately, there's those, as Bob pointed out, there's a lot of speed bumps in the road. But not all of those are natural speed bumps. Sometimes we put our own speed bumps in the way. And Bob, can you go to the next slide? And here's an example. This is not one of the websites that we've done, but we wanted to show you an example that is very prevalent in the software industry. And what we have circled here is requesting a demo. One would think that that is going to put you on the expressway to get you to that pot of gold. And there's an inherent problem with it. And that's a speed bump that we put in our own way. And while we want to accelerate the sales cycle, putting a requested demo immediately there and without any other pathway of a buyer's journey, and we're going to talk about that because it is fundamental, really short circuits the process from people being educated, understanding your solution, and ultimately, unless you have the most simple solution out there, people get lost in a demo and in trying to figure out how to use your software relative to something else. Because as creatures of nature, we're going to test something relative to something else. And unless you really have articulated what you're doing and what you're trying to offer the prospects, it's not going to be exactly clear how they're going to step through that demo or that trial. And so while all the best intentions of requesting a demo, getting a trial, that sometimes puts multiple speed bumps in the way. And let's go to the next slide, because this underscores another point. So in this example with this company, aside from requesting a demo, what they've done here is offering up products, integration, industries in a way that is just about them and about offering the toolkit of offerings that they have in the marketplace. That's a problem, because they're not offering what we call the buyer's journey. And the buyer's journey is about speaking to them in their language and presenting a pathway which makes sense for them. Not makes sense for the solutions that you've built, but makes sense for them as how they're going to use the solutions. And an example of that is a company, and we're going to go through some examples later, but a company that we've helped in the oil and gas space. They built oil and gas software for design and for corrosion. And they started off in this space where it's basically we've got these amazing tools and amazing solutions, but there was no entry point for the buyer, the different types of engineers who are going to use their solution. So consequently, to address that specific speed bump, we built in a whole series of role-based pathways, the buyer's journey, so to speak, that allowed the assimilation of the information so that the buyer can understand in a step-by-step way how this solution can be translated into their specific pain. So Bob, let's go to the next slide. So again, this is more of the same in regards to when we talk about a buyer's journey. Example, we have, say, the company in question is Technical Toolboxes, and a client of ours, and we've helped them accelerate and do 20% revenue growth year over year. In how we did that was reducing that friction, but putting in place those buyer's journeys for each of the roles. And they had 6 different engineers they were talking to. And so in the case of this company that we're projecting, they here are showing their resources. Come here to our site, here's our solution, here's our resources. And Bob, can you go to the next slide? And the problem with that is you're now just exposing, hey, we have newsletters, hey, we have webinars, hey, we have product updates. Come and just peruse how you want. We're a library, we're gonna open the door. You just come in and just poke around, pick what you like. That's a problem. That is a speed bump. In fact, that's like, those are some serious speed bumps with spikes on them. And so instead, taking those very unique communication devices, those marketing offers, which are used also as sales tools, but putting them in the sequence that they should be digested in the buyer's journey. So when you say, I'm going to sell to in the case of Technical Toolboxes, a corrosion engineer. All right, there are specific pains that a corrosion engineer, in the case of this client, had. And we are presenting, here are the challenges you have. And then here are the solutions in the context of those challenges that you have. And then here are elements of credibility that we are going to offer you in the form of case studies or other testimonials. So from a sequential delivery of the information, it's absolutely vital in order to reduce that friction, to increase the sales cycle speed, you need to present the information in a more cohesive, buyer-driven way, and not just throw it into your repository. It's fine if you have something as a repository in your footer and say, we're going to put everything here as well. But if you don't have your buyer's journey, which steps everybody through it and presents it in the way in which you want them to absorb and internalize the information, you're doing yourself a disservice and you're elongating your sales cycle. Bob, let's go to the next slide. That's perfect. Okay, so Bob, do you want to add anything to this particular slide when we're signing up for a free trial and hoping they convert? Because you and I had a conversation about this right before the webinar.
One of our clients that we worked with, their major conversion when somebody expressed interest was to convert them into a free trial. And what we did is we started looking at historically how well they were doing as far as converting those clients or those prospects into the sales cycle. And we found out the results were abysmal. So when you have something that you think is a good call to action, but you're not converting it into positive results for your company, you have to look at changing that up. And this was a speed bump that they were creating. They thought they were being good as far as giving everybody a free trial and getting them signed up. And in fact, they weren't. They weren't converting, and a lot of people were abandoning that. And in fact, a lot of their prospects thought the software was cumbersome to use. So it was giving them the opposite result, which is a big speed bump for them.
Yeah, that's really good, Bob. Thank you very much. Let's go to the next slide and talk about this. So this is about expectation setting. When we talk about the sales team will qualify you out, there's 2 points I want to make on this. One, about the 90% of the marketing generated lead is not sales ready. And another client of ours, they had one individual who was qualifying the leads. So in any given marketing lead, our best practice, and what we advise our clients is to touch them 7 times. And that's a combination of emails and phone calls with different offers, and they've engaged you in some way, but now you're trying to follow up with them and make sure that you not only communicate to them, but establish if there's something there. But when you create enough volume of leads, you present yourself with another speed bump. And the speed bump there is that you could quickly overwhelm your sales department. And so if we use the underlying best practice and assumption that you're going to need to contact a lead 7 times before you really can qualify them in or out, and if you overwhelm your sales team with leads and you don't have the right follow-up, in the case of this other client I'm referencing, they were only able to touch each of the leads 1 time. They were doing themselves a disservice. So not only was their conversion, it wasn't even 90%, it was even less. I mean, the 10% of the conversion was even less because they weren't doing the proper sales follow-up to the leads. And it's understandable if they are trying to close business and they are trying to qualify leads in, there's only so much time. But you need to take that into consideration that it isn't just about generating the leads, it's about ensuring that the process has followed through. The other point I want to make is we had another client of ours who was qualifying themselves out of business by elongating the actual sales cycle and not closing them, but actually just continually educating them. So by the time that a couple of months rolled by, the client, or the not client, but the prospect of them went with a competitor because the competitor actually spoke to the pains and articulated solutions to the pains and presented a path to closure, versus this client of ours who we had to advise a different path on how to communicate, but they were basically through their education, well-meaning education, were qualifying themselves out of a deal. So Bob, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's really good. So I think Craig's done a really good job talking about the speed bumps. So Craig just did a great job talking about 6 speed bumps that either knowingly or unknowingly we put in front of the buyer. So what we want to do now is say, okay, granted there are those speed bumps, and many of you may look at your own company and say, yes, we've got these speed bumps. Let's talk about best practices that you can migrate to offer that frictionless buying experience. And we're going to cover 4 major ones now that Craig's talked about the speed bumps, because we want to eliminate the speed bumps. The first one is upfront education. So if you talked about this quote here from the Corporate Executive Board, where they talk about 65% of the sales cycle is completed before the prospect engages or talks with a sales executive. What's happening today with your buyer is your buyer's going out and getting education somewhere. They're going to go out there, they've got a need, they're going to go out there and get educated about what their options are and so forth. So being able to provide that education and preference setting is really, really important. One of the things that we find too is, as Craig was talking about from a buyer's journey perspective, is let your buyer determine what education they want. Meaning, is it the industry that they're in that's most important to them? Is it their function? Are they a C-level executive, or are they an operational mid-tier executive, or are they a user? Take them through that process. And then from a persona perspective, give them the information that they need. One of our clients in the HR space has broken down their solution into recruitment, into onboarding, into training, and then into performance. So it's really looking at the full life cycle of talent management that they're providing through those different processes. So one of the things that Craig talked about, one of our clients, is technical toolboxes. Great client, providing an array of engineering software solutions to the oil and gas industry. And we help them migrate from what we would call the static informational website to a website which really takes their buyer through the buyer's journey. The reason it's so important is because if you have a crack sales team, you basically want those sales executives to be working on qualified buyers, the right audience, preference set, and somebody who really understands your value propositions. And you can do that through the digital experience that we're talking about here, which is taking, in this case, a integrity and risk management engineer through the entire buying process. And here's an example where we're doing it instead of on the persona level, we're doing this for a solution. One of their key solutions is the Pipeline Hub. And again, what is the Pipeline Hub? What are the challenges that you're going to be able to address? What's the right solutions? What are the frequently asked questions? And any type of evaluation process? Who are clients just like me? And what are the next steps that you can help me through? Here's another one of our clients, Visibility Software. And again, we're taking them through the buyer's journey, and we're doing it by function. We talked about recruiting, onboarding, training, performance. So being able to take each of those functional areas through the different solutions and talk about how you're going to help them optimize that business process function. Talent management is huge today in the marketplace. And so in being able to recruit and recruit well and get the right talent aboard is very important. It's paramount. So one of the things we talked about is innovation. And we've just given you a couple examples of what we call sales-driven websites. The idea is to take your sales process and the buying process and to overlay that on your website, and now start meaningfully taking your prospects and your buyers through the buyer's journey on the website. In some cases, we're going to talk about you can actually complete the sale on the website. Sometimes you can't. But what your buyer wants in this world of instantaneous gratification I talked about earlier is the ability to go through this process and for you to provide meaningful engagement with them each step of the way. So the first one we talked about as a best practice to realize this frictionless buying process is really the education process. The second is making sure it is truly frictionless, taking out the friction that they have. So what we talked about when Craig was talking about speed bumps is every buyer that comes to your company today, whether you're a B2B company, whether you're a software company, whether you're a B2C company, whoever it is, they're coming to your company today and they have a need. The reason why they're searching, reaching out to organizations is because they have specific needs, business problems, or challenges that they're trying to resolve. So you want to start there first and then connect your services or solutions to the back end of that. So heads and tails for the same coin, of course, if you will. Another thing that you can do, and we find this with many companies, is they spend a lot of time with valuable resources educating them, demonstrating to them, providing solutions or proof to them. One company that we worked with in Columbia, Maryland, is a company that provides solutions to the defense industry. And we found as they were working with defense contractors, we said, well, how many times are you doing a solution demonstration for your prospects? And they said, well, 60 times a month we're doing that. And I said, well, what percentage of those are education based and versus taking somebody through the buying and sales process? And they said most of that is education. So one of the things that we talk about is a level 1 demonstration, level 2, and then there's a level 3, is to record those. So we help a lot of companies really figure out for level 1, why don't you record a meaningful engagement demonstration, explainer demonstration for your audience. Level 2 may be a vertical by industry, and level 3 obviously is customized based upon your needs. But once we did that with this company, it enabled their most valuable resources to focus in on the true sales opportunities and instead automate the education process and preference setting that happened up front. The other thing is completing the buying process. So there are some of you today joining us in today's webinar where you say, we can't do the sale of our solution or service online. And that's completely fine. We've got a lot of clients like that. However, there are add-ons solutions. There are value-added services. There are maybe complementary third-party solutions that you plug into. Or there's educational training solutions that you offer that can be done that way. So here's an example of a video that we created for visibility software. And we've created a whole set of videos, explainer videos, explainer demonstrations that are really provided and recorded for them. And what we've also done with Technical Toolboxes, another client, is help them automate the whole training process, where you come in and I say, I need oil and gas midstream energy training. I need training in this area, or I want to get trained in certain solutions. Now you can do all that soup to nuts online. And we've helped accelerate that buying process for their transactional sales. So again, this is another best practices that you can put to work at your company, which is, number 1 is guide people through the buying process, make it frictionless. And number 2 is complete the process where it makes sense transactionally. The third best practice we want to talk about today is converting visitors into buyers. One of the interesting things that we found is that whenever you're dealing with a prospect, they have their issues, they have their career, they have their challenges, they have their goals. And what we've always thought about is, how do you take your service, your solution, and help them in their career? How do you make that something really important and pivotal to help them? Once you do that, the conversation does change. And there's always a champion. You always have a champion for your company that is working with you from the prospect side. And so how are you going to equip that champion? So part of this frictionless process that we talked about is giving them the tools, the knowledge, the insights that they need so that they can actually guide through the process with you. Some of the things that we look at are like buyer's guide. We often create buyer's guides because your buyer doesn't know how to buy. So why not give them some best practices about what they should be considering? A lot of times your champion doesn't know how to cost justify the investment that they're going to make in your service or in your solution. And so what they're going to need is some examples in a ROI justification model that you can use educate them, and then apply to their company. And so these are some good examples. Another one that's really interesting down here below is what we call the Quick Start program. And let me give an example of a Quick Start program right here. This is one that we created for a company that provides software solutions in the supply chain area to the mining industry. And they built a solution which includes hardware, software, services called Admit. And so what we did is we created a quick start guide, because one of the problems that they had is they were spending a lot of time in the customized quote area trying to figure out how to get started with their prospects. And let me go ahead and just share with you what that does look like. So for the Quick Start program, and this is it right here, what we basically did is we said, let's come up with the right price point, the right entry point to get started with your prospects. So the Quick Start program gets delivered for immediate results in the first 90 days. And what we've done is we created the right configuration that most prospects need, and at the right price point. So the idea there is to don't spend a lot of time in the sales cycle thinking about how we're going to identify specific unique needs and then come up with unique quotes and basically come up with a very long engagement. Instead, provide something that's going to help your client move forward in the process. Which brings up the fourth area: make it easy to buy. And the way you make it easy to buy throughout this frictionless buying experience is by delivering success stories about demonstrated ROI and positive outcomes. A lot of the success stories that I see out there today are talking about getting somebody live, getting them in production, getting them to start using the service. What's missing is, where's the beef? Where's the ROI? Where's the outcomes that you've been able to help them achieve? So having success stories that they can identify with and apply to themselves is really important. Having a quick start program that allows them to move from evaluation to implementation is really important. Offering multiple options. One of the things that we found, which is interesting, one of our clients does a lot of renewals, and they'll do even 3-year renewals for their clients, is they were coming back with one quote. And instead, what we said to them is, why don't you make the renewal for the one quote the A option, and why don't we create 2 other options, a B and C option, that they can consider in terms of their needs and their growth that they want. What really was interesting about this process, it changed the buyer behavior. So instead of the buyer focusing on one quote, one solution, and seeing how they can get a better price, they focused on which of the 3 options was best for them. In a similar fashion, what we find as you think about your clients is that you may have a number of different options based upon the adoption curve. Some of your clients may want to do it themselves. Give me the service, give me the solution, and let me go ahead and start using it. Another type of client may say, I want the solution, but I want your best practices coupled with implementation for that solution. Or the third type of client may be, I don't want the solution in-house. What I just really want to do is get a service offering from you where you're delivering the results to me. So that's more of a managed services option. So these are different ways for you to think about how to actually segment and work through the needs of your audiences as you segment the markets that you work with. And then finally, a proof of concept, which is much similar to like we're doing with the admin example that we went through. So these are basically 4 different ways that you can put in this frictionless buying process. And we wanted to give you those 4 ways, as well as figure out how to eliminate some of the 6 road speed bumps that Craig talked about earlier. What we'd like to do at this time now is just open this up for our audience, and then before you leave today is talk about some next steps that might be meaningful for you as you think about moving forward. So let's go ahead, if we could, open it up, post your questions that you have, and I'm going to go through some of the questions, Q&A, both for Craig and myself, and appreciate any and all feedback that you have here. Okay, so here's the first question that we have. What methods and processes can help when working with the public safety sector? Their buying process moves at a glacial speed. That's interesting, and we do see that when you're working with government or working with public safety, is you can be in that situation where their processes are going to move at a slow pace. One of the things I think that I would mention to you, there are a lot of ways for you to speed up the buying process. One process to help them is just to help train them on what they may consider as far as the process that they're considering. That's why we talk the buyer's guide. There are a lot of companies out there that get lost in the buying process, and they really don't know how to bring it to conclusion. So sometimes they need some help, since you're the expert, about how to do that. Another thing that we talked about in today's webinar is to give them an offer to act on. The worst thing you can do is wait until there's the eventual conclusion. So you may be talking to, let's say, a big organization. If we're talking about public safety here, you may be talking to a large organization within the government about how you can help them in terms of public safety. But the challenge is they may begin with a pilot or deployment in something much smaller. So sometimes I think it's more important to give them something that they can act on quickly, and then move to further deployment over time, what is typically called land and expand. So good question. Very much appreciate bringing up that question. Okay, here's another question. This one is from Mark. Mark says, how do I understand the buying process? It's a good question, Mark. There are a couple ways to understand the buying process for your audience. One is to do some surveys and ask decision makers the buying process and interrogate the buying process with them to figure out what they want to do and the steps they want to go through. Another way to do that is to look at your sales process. Take your top sales performer that you have today and see what's the sales steps that they're going through with your buyer, and then look at it differently. Look at it instead from a buying perspective. What is the buyer asking for, as opposed to what you're trying to do just in terms of sales? So these are different ways that you can really look at mapping out the buying process. Often we're going to map out the buying process with you, and then we're going to interrogate that and get some feedback from some prospects or customers to see if that meets their needs. So good question. Very much appreciate that. Here's another question, and this one is from Emily. How do I know my buyer's requirements? That's good. So, because a lot of times the buyer may not know what their requirements are. They may have an idea what their requirements are, but they may not fully understand that. And so again, what we look at when you're thinking about this holistically is helping the buyer really understand their requirements. A buyer's guide is a great way to do that. I also think that a lot of times your buyer may not understand where they truly have pain or challenges. And we found this to be very interesting as we've worked with many companies, is to go through rigorous discovery and help them understand maybe areas that they've been doing things manually or dysfunctionally, but they've accepted it. They've accepted it as a status quo. So really being able to flesh out those requirements in the discovery process is really good. Let's do one more question, and this one is from Ray. Let's see. How do I make the shift to a buyer's website without major expense? Okay, so interesting question that Ray had. So if you think about moving to what we call a buyer or sales-driven website, it's typically not just a redo. It's a evolution from where you are today. So I would bet every one of you on today's call today have excellent content, excellent information on your website today or available within your company. But it just needs to be laid out differently. So being able to map out the buyer's journey based upon some of the different criteria that we talked about, and then to think about what's the right way to provide the information the knowledge, the offers along that buyer's journey is something that would be a really interesting transformation or evolution for your company. Okay, so that's really great to get those questions, and thank you everybody for those questions. Let's see if we have anything else left here. No, so that's great. So let's talk about some next steps. One way to walk away from today's webinar with these best practices is to say, I really want to eliminate the speed bumps that Craig talked about. I also want to implement some of the best practices that Bob talked about. So one of the things you may want to do is think about what's the most important thing that you can implement from today's webinar. Is it to really guide your buyer through the buying process? And that might be the next evolution of your think about how to work through this. Is it maybe to look at your engagement process you have with your champions? And what are the tools that you need both from a sales team and maybe even from partner team in terms of helping them graduate and to become a sales opportunity for your company? It may be, as we talked about with the company up in Columbia, North Carolina, providing these self-paced educational explainer videos and demonstrations and that immersive learning experience to really help give that experience and give that insight to your customer to show them and your prospect what is your solution, how does it work, what are some of the benefits. It may be, as Craig did, working with technical toolboxes, is executing the transactional sale for training and education. And then finally, it's about eliminating friction everywhere that you have it today so that you can accelerate your sales cycle and revenue creation process. It's exactly when we did our poll at the beginning, we talked about what your major goal from today's webinar is, and you talked about reducing the sales cycle. So this is how you do it. This is how you do it both online in terms of the digital experience. This is how you do it offline in terms of both your sales executives and your channel partners that you have today. So I hope that you found today's webinar to be fantastic. I'd like to encourage you to join us for our next webinar. And the next webinar we're going to have coming up next month is going to be very timely because we're going to be talking about 5 ways that you can fight the recession if we are in fact in a recession, because it should not hinder you, it should not inhibit you from growing revenue. So we're going to talk about how do you fight that, how do you win against that. And finally, on behalf of myself, Craig, and our entire On Demand Advisors team, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today for today's webinar. And we look forward to talking to you further about how to implement your frictionless buying experience and to help accelerate the sales process that you have today with all of your customers and prospects. Thank you, everyone. If you have any questions, of course, here's our contact information. Send us a note, call us, visit our website. But we'd love to hear from you. And this is all about making 2022 and next year fantastic years for your company. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.